Hello and welcome back to another episode of On the Cube Leadership Podcast. I'm Craig O'Sullivan and looking forward to taking you through some things that are happening in the news lately that have inspired us to maybe draw out some leadership messages from them. And today we're going on a theme of leadership contradictions. Yes, we see it so often that leaders contradict themselves. You know, the old saying of you got to walk the walk, not talk the talk. It's so true. Yet, is it even possible? Is it a bad thing if we have contradictions? Is it possible for us to possibly change our mind, change our view on things, maybe there's some contradictions in what we're doing, but does that actually mean that we are bad leaders? Does that mean that we aren't walking the walk and talking the talk? Does that mean that we are lying? Does that mean that we're putting on a facade? Who knows? Let's discuss it today, and we're going to discuss it with the business pastor, Dr. Rod St. Hill. Welcome back yet again for another week, Dr. Rod St. Hill.
Thank you. It's great to be with you again, Craig, as always.
As always, it's good to be able to go through some of these stories, talk about leadership contradictions. So let's jump straight into it and talk about Trump. Yep, controversial topic, I know, and yes, someone who himself seems to be a walking contradiction. If you look at any of his comments, any of the stuff that he goes through, you can find a lot of contradictions, and it just seems to be his personality. I think we're going to talk about that a little bit later because we're going to be talking about him in another segment as well. And so I think we'll talk about that part then. But right now, we're not necessarily going to talk about Trump. We're going to talk about Trump's trial, right? The Trump trial. Now, I to be honest, I've lost count or lost track of which trial this is that they're talking about, because he's got so many different trials on at the moment. Like I thought he's just under trial, but he's not. He's in different states. He's under trial for different things. It's crazy. I don't quite get it all, but a story came out that one of the judges that is hearing his case says that there is a judge that has been donating to stop Trump campaigns, right? To organizations and people that are against Trump and trying to stop Trump in everything that he's doing. This judge has been found to be financially supporting those organizations. And now he's residing over this court case. Dr. Rod, is that a contradiction? Is that a conflict of interest? Like I know that obviously in a legal sense, yeah, okay, the legal sense, it can be a bit of an issue. But in general as well, is this right?
Absolutely not. Very clear conflict of interest. If it's not an actual conflict of interest, certainly potential and perceived as well. And the only right course of action is for Judge Sarah Wallace to recuse herself from hearing the matter. Cut and dried, absolutely no room for debate whatsoever.
Okay, great. Well, that's this segment done. Let's move on to the next one.
Yeah, but the big issue, of course, is why does it happen in America? Why is it happening? And in particular, why does it happen for President Trump? And that's because the justice system is being used for political purposes. That is wrong. Cannot be justified on any basis whatsoever.
So obviously, in a court case, the judge has to swear themselves in to be impartial, right? And so how can...
Well, justice requires it. See, our system of justice actually requires it. The judge has got to be objective. And look, nobody can be totally objective, of course. That's an utter impossibility, and that's why juries exist. Yep. I'm not sure whether there's a jury involved in this particular case because I'm not aware of the full details of it, but what it's all about is trying to stop Donald Trump being considered in the primaries votes, and there are a number of states that are taking action.
Yep.
And this particular judge has clearly got a conflict of interest. Look, there's just no doubt about it. And she says, I think she said in response, no, I can be objective. So it doesn't matter if she thinks she can be objective or not. Other people don't. And therefore, there's at least a perceived conflict of interest. There's definitely a potential conflict of interest. And there may well be an actual conflict which she's not prepared to disclose, or she's not self-aware enough to believe that that's the case. So, look, she just shouldn't be hearing it. It's pure and simple.
Yeah. Now, we're talking about a judge, and it's like, yeah, that's great. Let's talk about leaders, because obviously we want to use this as a metaphor for leaders. Obviously, we as leaders all have our own opinions. We all have our own side of the aisle that we sit on, whether we're red or blue. We all have our opinions on certain aspects in religion, on business, on politics. We all kind of sit on either side. Is it important for a leader of an organization, a leader of well, actually in politics, maybe they shouldn't be impartial if they're leading in politics, but leading in all different areas of life, whether it be entertainment, media, like whatever. Is it important when you're leading an organization that you remain impartial?
Not necessarily, and I think often it's impossible. That's why we have this concept of conflict of interest. So if you're in a leadership position and a decision is being made that is going to affect you personally, or someone who's a member of your family or a close friend, and there will be a benefit accruing to yourself or your family or a close friend, or an organisation with which you've got some kind of relationship, be that financial or other, then I think you should declare the conflict of interest and count yourself out of the final decision-making process. That doesn't necessarily mean that you shouldn't have the opportunity to say something. And look, that's general practice in boards when we're dealing with conflict of interest. You declare the conflict, and then your fellow directors, or if we're talking about a leadership team, the leadership team should make a decision as to whether or not you're going to be able to vote on the issue, whether or not you're going to be able to speak on the issue but not vote, whether or not you're going to be able to be present, not speak, not vote, or whether you've got to remove yourself from the discussion physically. And we should be having those kinds of discussions on a regular basis. It's particularly difficult, I think, in the corporate world, particularly with large publicly owned organisations.
Yeah.
And this is where boards need to be very, very diligent in scrutinising decisions that are being made by the senior management to ensure that senior management is not taking risk which is actually borne by the shareholders or the employees rather than themselves. And I think there are one or two cases that we're observing in Australia right now that fit that category. It's a difficult thing. But I think leaders need to be scrupulous in this area. And it really does help if you're a Christian and you understand that God is your provider and your protector. It's okay to admit to a conflict of interest because God is going to look after you anyway. So you don't have to look after yourself through the decisions that are being made in your leadership team.
That's really good. I want to take a shift from the board and then talk about leading individuals, right? Because look, when you obviously been involved in a lot of Christian organizations and stuff, it's much easier to be able to lead someone that does have the same views as you. But a lot of leaders don't have that luxury. A lot of leaders are leading people that have very opposing political views, very, very opposing religious views, very opposing views on just everyday life. And you actually see that disparity because there is actually a number of, there is a difference between leadership level people and workers. And sometimes there's a big class difference. And so there's obviously going to be, very different views on things. So I actually see a challenge with leading someone through, going back to this story about this judge that has a strong opinion, says she's going to be impartial, but let's be honest, she's going to be leading from this very strong point and then making this impact on a person she's leading, which is Trump. So, kind of leading because she's in control of his destiny at the moment. But when we're leading people, I feel I suppose what I want to try to discuss is, how do we lead someone by still having, obviously leading from our value systems and leading from our point of views and our experience, etc., but leading someone that has a completely different, viewpoint or whatever from us, and us not be our leadership not being negatively impacted by it. Because I kind of see that, like let's go to an extreme. Let's say you're a Christian leader and you're leading someone who from the LGBT plus QZ whatever society, right? So how do you lead that person when your views are so contradictory to what they their lifestyle and who they are and everything like that? I kind of see that that's where these contradictions of or conflicts of interest kind of could come into play into leadership with our opinions and the way we treat our team, etc. How should we lead someone that has a very, very, very different view than us?
Look, it really depends on what you're leading them to. I think there are many, many cases where a Christian can be working with people who don't hold to a biblical Christ-centered worldview, but that's not really too relevant to the decision which is being made.
Yeah.
I think if you've got to make a decision on something which is dependent upon a person's view about the expression of human sexuality, then you're in a very different situation altogether. But I think in general, what I would say is don't be afraid to engage and seek to persuade. I think lazy leaders impose their view from the top. I think leaders who are authentic leaders with high levels of integrity, they know what their position is and they seek to persuade others while listening to different perspectives.
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, sometimes a leader will have to make a decision that others don't agree with. That's what makes leadership lonely at times.
Yeah,
One other thing I would say too is that, look, if you're surrounded with a leadership team where members hold values that are very different to yours, you've probably made some big mistakes in setting up your leadership team.
Yeah.
So as a general rule, when you're establishing a leadership team, as best you can, you need to be choosing people whose values align with yours, because if not, their values will actually change the culture of your organisation. And I don't think that's what you want as a leader. So you want people in leadership positions, you want people on your team who are actually going to sustain the culture of your organisation, not undermine it.
Okay. So there's one thing that I kind of feel like saying about this is, when we are leading someone that does have different views, I mean, look, at the bottom, as leaders, we need to remember that people are people, right? No matter what their views, no matter what their opinions, and we as leaders are responsible for the caring of those people, for the growth of those people, so it's our responsibility to make sure that happens. So when we're leading someone, we should remove those viewpoints, our opinions about the person and their views, especially, like you said, especially if our outcome isn't driving towards anything to do with that, right? Obviously, if it is based on those things, then you've obviously hired the wrong person, and that's why we need to make sure we have aligned values and all those sorts of things. But, there's some leaders that actually don't have a choice with who they're working with, because they may be middle management leaders, and HR does the hiring and they're just given a team and you've got to lead them.
Oh, that happens. That happens.
So
that's where persuasion is so important. You've got to develop powers of persuasion, and that largely is words, is the way in which you use words. You need to become good at crafting the English language. You need to become really good at putting your arguments together.
Yeah. That's good. And remembering that people are people. Like that's the thing. Now, how do we then lead them if we have differing viewpoints on something that's kind of irrelevant to what we're leading? Is understanding the purpose of what we're working towards. I think that's the key, is when you're leading someone that has different viewpoints or different culture or whatever, if you're leading them, find the common ground, which is usually the outcome or the project that you're working on, what's the purpose of that, and see how you can both integrate into that and focus on what brings you together and focus on leading them in that aspect rather than focusing on things that pull you apart, as long as those things are not mission critical. Okay, so let's shift to well, let's stay on Trump. Why not? Like I did have another article in between, but we'll get back to that. Let's talk about another story with Trump, and we're talking about Ron DeSantis. Now, as always, with every article that we're talking about or any YouTube video that we're referring to, links are all in description if you want to go and check those things out at all. But let's talk about DeSantis. DeSantis was recently on a podcast with Patrick Bet-Davies on the PBD podcast. PBD, he's a great interviewer. He like the way he's able to show respect and still challenge people. I think is really good. And obviously he comes from a place of a lot of wisdom and stuff like that. So if you haven't checked out the PBD podcast, go and check it out. It's on Valuetainment. Go check on our Valuetainment. Doing great things in content. Now, Ron DeSantis. He was interviewing Ron DeSantis and talking about, the Trump effect on his campaign. That Trump endorsed him to first be voted in as governor, elected as governor, and Trump what's the word? Endorsed him. I know I just said the word, but it left me for a moment. Trump endorsed him, and there's all this saying that Trump wouldn't have, without Trump, he wouldn't have won and everything like that. And Ron DeSantis was just talking through this scenario of like, well, originally Trump supported him, but Trump used to really sing his praises and do everything like that. And then now Trump is talking him down, bagging him out, telling him he's doing a bad job and everything like that. Yet Trump and his whole family live in Florida. They moved to Florida because obviously, he created a great environment. The state, when it was going through COVID, was the one that got some of the best results, as far as economic results, and there's just endless things that there's proof that Ron DeSantis is good, but Donald Trump is just attacking him. Now, I know I said at the opener, Trump is one of those people that does tend to just flip flop, just say whatever comes out of his mind, actually probably not out of his mind. It's first words out of his mouth, which I don't think sometimes go through his mind, go through his brain. So let's take him kind of out of this situation, because it is kind of a bad example that he does this. But let's say a leader, is it possible for a leader to change their opinion about someone or something without then being voted a contradiction, or you don't walk the walk, you're lying about things or whatever? So is it possible for a leader to change their mind?
Sure. And I think most of us do from time to time. And I think the best way to approach that is to be able to lay out the reasons why you've made that change. Mm-hmm. It seems to me that the rules of the game are pretty different in politics. And that's one reason why I don't like what I see in politics. Mm-hmm. I don't like it at all. I don't like the name calling. I just don't like the way politics is done. Yep. Because far too much of it is based on the person, not their policies, not their values, and so on. And I think that's to the detriment of Western civilization. So I don't like it at all. Now,
before you get on to your thought, I'll just jump on that. And I think that while we're not a political podcast, like we're not a political podcast, we're a leadership podcast talking about leadership things. But I think that that's why we have so many examples from the political realm, is because they just do things differently. And from my opinion, they make a lot of mistakes from a leadership perspective. So I think that they kind of like are very public, very open examples of what not to do. So yes, I agree. Now onto your point, Dr. Rod.
Well, look, I think the way in which Ron DeSantis handled the question was very good, except that I really think his response should have been, well, we don't really know. whether Donald Trump's endorsement actually delivered that tiny majority of votes. He won by something like 38,000 votes the first time he stood for the governorship. So it's a very, very narrow win. Look, frankly, I don't know how you could make a judgment about whether or not the endorsement from Trump made the difference that actually got him into office in the first place. But certainly his resounding success next time, he was voted in with a majority of well over 1.1 million. And I think that was pretty clearly based on his policies.
Yeah.
And so, I think you could argue that fairly strongly. But look, I felt he was very measured in his response. He didn't stoop to name calling, which I think is that's an honourable way of approaching it. Bet David is an excellent interviewer, as you said. I found that whole interview very, very interesting and informative too, because I learnt more about Ron DeSantis. So, you talked about Donald Trump and his flip-flopping. Look, I think he's a very smart person and he achieved a lot in office, and he's just not generally accorded the recognition for what he achieved. He achieved more in one term than most presidents of the United States have ever achieved, and most of them wind up with 2 terms. And certainly I would say he's been the most successful president probably in 2 decades. But I do think although he's very, very smart, he probably needs a little bit more wisdom. And I think his lack of wisdom cost the Republicans the majority in the Senate. And so I think in some ways he can be blamed for some of the issues that have emerged in politics in the United States. But in terms of flip-flopping, in terms of changing our mind, I've done it, but generally after a long period of reflection. And I might add, usually because I've listened to a voice of dissent.
Explain.
And that's why I love dissenters. Well, if you don't have dissenters, if there's no one's ever going to speak up and offer an alternative, then I don't think organisations can change. They really can't progress, and they'll ultimately shrivel and die. So I don't think we should ever be afraid of dissent. Sure, there are some people who make a habit of dissent, that's how they form their identity. I don't think those kinds of people are all that helpful to you as a leader. But someone who's actually going to say, hang on a minute, I don't agree with that and here's why, I think that kind of dissent is to be welcomed. And I believe a good leader will take that dissent and will reflect on it. They'll do their research, and if it becomes clear that they do need to change their position, then they should, and they should explain why.
Yeah. So, as a bit of a leadership lesson, like that's a really good point. Is like, don't surround yourself with yes men. Like,
the other thing I would say is, don't bother using politicians as your role models. Just generally speaking, they're not good role models for leaders, in my opinion.
Yeah.
Certainly not what they do in public. What happens behind closed doors might be different. But I just wouldn't say to leaders, look, go and have a look at how a whole lot of presidents and prime ministers and ministers and all that sort of stuff act and build your leadership model on that. I'd just say, no, forget it. You're wasting your time. There are better models to follow.
They're playing a different game to us.
Well, I think they are.
They're playing a different game. So, yeah, look, we as leaders shouldn't surround ourselves by yes men. Like we should have some people that have authority, like yourself, Dr. Rod, and my board are people that you regularly correct me on things. Sometimes even on this podcast, you'll do it, right? And I open that so I know where that comes from. I know that I've given you authority to do that. You can speak into my life and correct me on anything that I'm doing. And that's important for us to have. If we just surround ourselves with yes men or think that we just have all the answers and just ignore and any negative comment that we get is just haters, then we're missing valuable learnings. We're missing opportunities to grow and to change. But can we change our mind over time? Yeah. But like you said, it needs to be a thought out process. It needs to be a well-educated, well-informed process. And over time, I think that we as leaders shouldn't jump on bandwagons. If we, rather than, and I'm not even just, let's go back, rather than changing our minds, before we set our mind against something, make sure that it's not just setting our mind, jumping on a bandwagon, not just jumping on, setting our mind, jumping on the next fad or whatever. Once again, let's be considered in our decision to the decision we make, or what we stand for, or what we like, or what we believe, but also just as considered when we change our mind. And so it is okay for us as leaders to change our mind. How do we avoid, when we change our mind, seeming like people that are just flip-flopping, or people go back to a post we did 5 years ago or 10 years ago and go, well, see, you're saying something different. How do we go through that process of changing our mind and our opinion while still not appearing like we're just chasing a fad, or we're just, just changing our mind and people can't rely on what we say?
Well, I think it gets down to knowing what your position is and why you hold that position. Mm-hmm. And if you know why you hold a position, then you can be quite clear in terms of how you came to change that position. And basically, look, I think if you take that approach, you really won't be doing a lot of flip-flopping.
Yeah.
And I agree with you. We need to be very careful about simply joining whatever fad happens to be happening. Yeah. We read an article in the Harvard Business Review, for example, and say, right, that's the way to go from now on. Then in a few months' time, you read another article and say, oops, no, we're going to change. I don't think that's a really good basis for leadership, and we can get into the sort of politics of academic writing too sometime, if you like. But look, I mean, the very term flip-flop kind of implies that it's something that you're doing, regularly, that it's part of your personal style, so to speak. I think that is something to be avoided as a leader. I think it's best for a leader to be somebody who is considered to be the kind of person who takes what you offer seriously, who weighs it up, who reflects on it. Mm-hmm. And if change appears to be something which is sensible, then you change your mind. Yeah. So I would say that for most leaders, flip-flopping should be rare, but it's something that they should do from time to time as they get better knowledge, as they gain wisdom from experience and from listening to what others are saying.
Yeah. And to kind of follow up on that, or kind of reaffirm what you're saying, is when we do change our mind, one thing I remember thinking back to the time when I used to coach professional speakers, and we'd coach people how to present from stage and how to share your message, and we'd talk about sharing a testimony of what caused you to believe in whatever it was that you're selling or you're pitching or whatever, and understand that you took a process to make that decision. You can't expect everyone else to just be on board just because you say so now. And so as leaders, you may change your mind or change your beliefs on something. And let's even look at directly running an organization. You may be looking at presenting, you may run your operations a particular way. And you've been thinking about a new process or changing the operations for a while, and you've been doing some research, and you've been watching podcasts and reading some books or whatever, or gone to a conference. And then now you're at a point where you're like, yes, I now know how we're going to change the way we operate our company. And so you go in the next day and tell everyone, this is the way we're doing it. Well, you're going to put a lot of people offside, probably lose a lot of great leaders, lose a lot of great employees, because they're not going to be on board with it just because you come in and say, right, we're going this way now. So if we change our view and opinion on something, remember, when we share it with others, we need to allow them to go through that same process. And so one thing we used to teach, professional speakers is take people on that journey. When you're presenting people, when you're proposing something to your team, to a board, to potential customers or whatever, if you're looking at helping them believe what you believe, then you need to make sure that you're allowing them to go on that journey, and you take them through kind of, we call it like a bit of a montage of the process that you went through and some of those key moments and key thoughts, so that then they can have a rapid process to get to that same point as well with you, if that's, if they're on board. So that'll be my suggestion, is if you do change your mind, don't just come out and go, this is what I believe now. Explain your process, explain that you've gone through things, because even if you're not going to change someone's mind with it, people can see that you as a leader, they've gone through a process of doing this. And remember, as a leader, you're an influencer. You influence people, and they may not be on board with what you say right now, but they will capture like, when I go to make a decision, that person didn't just tell me their decision. They told me that they went through this massive thought process. Next time I need to make a decision, I'm going to go through that same thought process as well. So while you're maybe helping people change their mind and believe what you believe, you're also helping people become better decision makers themselves, because you've shared the journey that you're on as well. Dr. Rod, do you have anything more to say about that topic?
No, I think we've pretty well exhausted that one.
Great. Now, let's get on to the next one. Now, this, I'm about to go. Now, you're probably wondering, why do they use a lot of videos from YouTube rather than articles? Well, because I don't read much, and I tend to just watch videos. That's how I consume my content. But also, whenever I go to share you guys a page, it's full of ads, and there's pop-ups, and there's things jumping around everywhere, and there's terms and conditions, and there's like, oops, I just clicked on an ad. Sorry, that's why we don't do that. Okay, so next topic we're talking about is Matthew Perry. So Matthew Perry from Friends fame, Chandler from Friends, passed away on, I think it was Saturday or Sunday. I can't remember what day it was that it was announced. But before we actually get into the actual topic of today with this story, one thing that I found really interesting, Dr. Rod, is when I heard about this story, I was with a group of friends, and it was a group of males and females and all everything like that. Every single female that was in that group all got really, really, really sad in that moment. They were like almost to the point of crying, and us guys are like, "Oh, he died? That's sad." But like, now condolences to his family, and it sucks that he's passed away. And so please, don't think we're being heartless with this. But I just found it really interesting. Why is it that a celebrity, that these girls in the group, they had never knew him, only knew a character that he played, didn't even know him, only knew a character he played. Why is it that when a celebrity passes, it has such an impact on people?
Well, I think one reason is we do think we know them. We've watched them, in our lounge room for whatever it was. I think it was 10 seasons, wasn't it? They didn't get to their 11th.
Yeah.
And so they become familiar. You do get familiar with the character, but ultimately, of course, that familiarity passes over to the actor or actress themselves. So I think it's understandable that people would be upset, and I think women often are much more expressive of their emotions than men as well. So it doesn't surprise me that all women in your group were expressing a great deal of regret at his passing, particularly at the circumstances of his passing.
Yep.
And for those who know that he spent about half his life in rehab, there's a great deal of sadness in his life. He had a lot of major obstacles to overcome.
Yeah. So let's get on to that. The thing that, in line with our leadership theme that we wanted to talk about today is, when this first was announced, it was announced that he had a cardiac arrest. There was no drugs involved. He was alone. All this sort of stuff, right? Like instantly, that was the instant report. Now we're looking a couple of days later. Now the reports say that someone found him. So obviously there was someone with him. It's possible the coroners are saying it's now a drowning rather than a cardiac arrest. And the paramedics, noticed drowning like that. Like that's what they noted when they first arrived. They're doing a toxicology report because they suspect drugs. And obviously, like you mentioned, he spent most of his time in rehab, and he is open about his ongoing challenge with drug use and drug reliance, etc. Why is it that when these things are reported, first of all, it's like that they were very very what's the right overt, or they were very forward in saying no drugs involved and it was just a cardiac arrest. There was there was nothing more about it. Why is it that when something happens, our instant response, and this is as leaders, I'm not talking about someone passing and us talking about, news reporters. I'm talking about us as leaders. When something happens, our natural response is to try to cover it up. Our natural response is to try to protect reputation, all those sorts of things. Why is that our instant response?
I don't know whether I can answer that. You need someone who's trained in psychology to answer that. But it's a funny thing about the media, isn't it? While people are alive, they want to find all the dirt. And then when people die, they want to cover it up. So I can't really figure that out, frankly. But I think we do have a tendency to want to protect people in death. We want to protect their reputation and also the feelings of their families and their loved ones. So it's natural, I think. But of course, what happens with the news media is they've still got to get a story. So they don't want to merely announce that someone has died. Yep. They want to sort of pull it apart, dissect it, and turn a paragraph into a page, so to speak. And then, in a way, they've got an incentive to keep the story alive because he's well known. Once somebody becomes, a fairly successful actor, then they become public property to some extent. And we've talked about this on previous podcasts, of course. And we ourselves have talked about how we could increase our own ratings by focusing on particular individuals, and we made the decision not to do that, not to chase the ratings, so to speak. But it's a very different game for people in the media, and I think also human beings have a tendency to want to complete the circle, and when we don't know, we tend to make it up, or to put it more nicely, we tend to speculate.
Yes.
And it seems to find its way into the media, and that it can go on for days and days. And of course, we've had the spectacle of people coming, he had a COVID vaccination, so it must be the COVID vaccination. And, that blew up for a day or two on social media, which I think's pretty unfortunate. We can tackle the whole issue of the dangers of COVID vaccination in different ways, I think, in better ways.
Yeah.
It's very sad. Look, the lifestyle of the rich and famous is something that we really should do a lot more research on, I think, because so many don't live as long as they should. I don't think they get to make anything like the contribution they could make to the flourishing of humankind, because they're usually immensely talented people. They are very, very hardworking in the main, but artistic people tend to also be people who become extremely self-reflective, and they often suffer from depression.
Yeah.
And more than anything, they need our compassion. And, in my own reflection on the passing of Matthew Perry, I kept thinking, maybe I shouldn't just be the business pastor, because I'm acutely aware of how difficult it is for people in business to deal. They can pretty much cope with most of their business issues, but it's really struggling with issues of faith and family and, dealing with sin and so on. These are the things that business people need a lot of help with, because they can get coaches and mentors. That's not hard. And of course, you and I both know good ones. But they're not often past it. And that, if you talk to them, and I think something similar goes on for the rich and famous in general, and probably they've got a lot more to lose than you and I have by levelling with someone as well. So it's very sad, I think, that they're not surrounded by people whom they can absolutely trust to unburden themselves to. So it saddens me greatly. It does. What do we do as leaders? I think as leaders we need to develop the capacity for great compassion. We really do. We need to have compassion, and we need to outwork that in our words and in our actions as well.
Yeah. So, I mean, you mentioned about like protecting his legacy, and we want to protect that. Let's shift from the idea of Matthew Perry, the sad story, but let's bring this back into leadership. What does this mean for leaders? Because we as leaders do tend to do want to cover things up or protect people in our organization. They made mistakes. We've spoken about it previously with some pretty high influence, high reputation pastors that we've spoken about recently. That they're all now in trouble because they're trying to cover things up and everything like that. What's that balance as a leader to be able to protect those that are following us, but still be responsible and not covering, hiding?
Well, yeah. Look, we've talked before about that balance between what is private and what is public, and I mean, I think that in general we appropriate too much as public property.
Yes. From
individuals. And I think that's one of the things that makes it difficult for leaders who do have a high profile as influencers in social media, in the corporate world, in the church world, and sports world, and so on. I think that we probably need to be protective of that which is private, but also. And I find this very difficult myself, of course. We've got to have some people around us whom we can trust enough to be totally honest with. What we see of people in the media, that's never going to be the real person. That you must have some people in your life with whom you can be real. That's going to have to be your thermostat, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And it's not easy. I think in many ways, the greater your public profile, the more difficult it actually is to find people like that, people to be your thermostat, so to speak. Perhaps those of us who are Christians should work on that and should become examples of how to manage that difficult balance between the private and the public better. How we can be open and honest with that small group of people whom we trust. Unfortunately, look, there isn't a lot of trust in the world today, frankly. And trust is the most important currency there is. I just don't think there's anything that comes anywhere near it. But the currency has been debased so much in modern society that I just think these people are left lonely. Most leaders will tell you the worst thing about leadership is the loneliness.
Yeah, that's true. I remember when I first started focusing on actual leadership was when, like, I've always kind of found myself in leadership positions, but I remember the first time I really was consciously aware of leadership was when I was leading the church. And in that, I realized that, hold on a second, I'm struggling to be truly honest. Now, I wasn't putting on a facade. I wasn't fake or anything like that. I was real. I'm who I am. But there's some thoughts and some things you keep to yourself because I can't share it with the people I was leading at the time were my friends because it's who you do in life with and everything. I couldn't share it with my friends because I'm leading them and kind of I'm not quite sure. I want to put on the best outcome for them, and then the person who's my leader, well, I'm trying to impress him because he's, I want him to have a good opinion on, because he's the one that can open up doors for me and everything like that. And so I found in that moment, I realized that there's no one I can open up to 100%. I can share some things with people, but I've always got to kind of be a little guarded. And that's when I found someone that I was able to talk to that was kind of outside of that. And he was actually a pastor from another church on the opposite side of the country. And he actually really helped me understand that. I was able to open up to him. And it really, really strengthened my leadership, because I'm like, now I'm talking this out. I mean, the Bible talks about, confessing your sins to your brethren and stuff like that. Like, there's a reason for that. That's not so that you can confess your sins and be forgiven from them or whatever. It's like, we need to verbalize things, because if we're not verbalizing things, we're keeping them inside. We don't know what they're doing to us inside. We may be making a decision that maybe not right, or maybe doing an action that kind of like, well, if we keep it to ourselves, we know it's not right. So that thing's just going to grow and fester and become even worse. And unfortunately, what happens then is we see it all across the church, and we actually see, you see it's, how would I say, it's highlighted, or it's under a magnifying glass, I believe, in churches, but it happens to all leaders in all organizations, that they have a moral failing. They keep something, to themselves and not share it with those key people that are important. And then eventually it comes out in a negative way and leads to some mistakes. So, yeah.
Look, I think, your experience of finding a pastor who's outside your immediate environment who could actually pastor you, I think that's really important. And that's one of the main motivations I have as the business pastor. I'm not, I never ask people for money. I don't use it as an opportunity to build the church that I pastor. I actually encourage them to find a church locally and engage in that. We can go into that in more detail some other time, but I do think it's really important. So for most leaders, they need to find someone or a small group of people outside their organisation with whom they can have these very honest conversations and receive honest, fearless feedback. But it's rare. It's very rare.
And I've got to jump in and do a bit of a selfish promotion for you, Dr. Rod, that's why you're my pastor, because you understand me and my unique challenges as a business owner, and you're able to guide me with great wisdom. And you have helped me so much over the years over the 12, 13 years that we've known each other. You've helped me a lot. And I've been able to be completely open and honest with you, and you've been able to talk me through some very, very tough personal challenges. And I believe that I'm only where I am now, having walked through those personal challenges and believing that I'm in a good position, I suppose. I haven't, I feel like I've made mistakes along the way, but I feel like I've done the best. Like I'd be very open to anyone knowing everything that I'd done, because you had guided me along the way, and I always had that, that angel, I suppose, on my shoulder, even when we're not talking. I shared this with you last week. Like, I've actually been going through some other challenges that I haven't spoken to you about, not because I'm hiding it from you, because I'm like, actually, I don't need to talk to you about it, because I've got your voice in my ear giving me the guidance, because you've already helped me through this thing before with something else. And I think we all need that. And so I encourage you, find yourself a pastor. And if you're a business owner and you need a pastor, that you feel like your pastor doesn't understand you, I'm not telling you to change church or anything like that. Maybe reach out to Dr. Rod. He is the business pastor. He is there for business people. He's my pastor. He's my mentor. He's someone who guides me and mentors me through all my challenges. And reach out to him and see. Put a comment below, or whatever. Reach out to us on social. Reach out to me on social, and I'll connect you guys, or you can find him on socials. and maybe he's the support that you're actually needing. So it was a little bit of a shameless plug for you, Dr. Rod, but it's not really a plug because it's not like you make money from it. Because like he said, he doesn't charge. But if you feel like giving to his ministry, then of course, that's what I do.
A pastor doesn't charge.
No,
it's as simple as that. Pastors don't charge.
In the kingdom, we believe in generosity, and I believe that principle in my business as well.
Mentors and coaches, definitely.
Yeah.
And look, I'm aware of some businesses who pay intercessors, and I think that's fine as well. But pastoring's a little bit different, and that's the way I feel. My own denomination, I think, would be horrified if they discovered that there was someone holding themselves out of the business pastor and then holding out their hand at the same time for money. It just doesn't work. It just doesn't work that way.
No.
But anyway.
You can't ask, but I can tell of what I do as a business owner. Be generous and support the ministry that is supporting you. That's that's just what I've got to say. But Dr. Rod, I want to jump back on something that you mentioned before, because it was something that you and I actually spoke about in our private conversation last week about people will fill in the gap. People will get a bit of information and then fill in the gap with the rest with whatever they think is real. And obviously that's something that's happening with Matthew Perry's thing. And I think this is a really good leadership principle for us to understand, is you and I talking about some personal things, and I was sharing that someone's spreading rumors about me, and then they're not nice, not nice and not true rumors. And you just went, well, you got to make sure that there's not as big of I'm paraphrasing what you said, and I'm structuring it slightly differently. But you pretty much said, like, make sure you're doing enough to fill in as much of the gap as possible, so there's less of a gap for people to fill in, right? Like there's so make sure you don't do anything that is perceived or could be perceived, for someone to interpret in a certain way, so that they can fill in that gap with some things that are false and make up stories that aren't true about you. So I think that's a really good leadership principle, is understand that when you keep information from people, which you should, like there's not everything should be public, like Dr. Rod and I have spoken about on many podcasts before, but make sure that there's not too much of a gap that people will fill in with their own opinions and then form an opinion on it, and it'll be a completely infactual, and then spread bad rumors about you. So be careful, be very careful by your actions. Make sure nothing can be perceived to be misinterpreted at all. And that's something that I remember I first learned when I got into ministry, is like, don't be in a car alone with a woman. Like, don't take, when you're dropping kids off at youth, don't be in a car alone with a kid, and just all those sorts of, like, just don't be in a room alone. Don't all those sorts of things. Make sure you always got someone else with you, and all those sorts of things, so that you can make sure that you are protecting yourself from bad rumors. So you mentioned that before, and I just wanted to jump back on that, Dr. Rod. But let's transition to the next story. Andy Stanley. Now we talk about some mega pastors, mega church pastors. Are they called mega pastors?
I doubt it, but certainly mega church. No doubt about that.
Mega church pastor Andy Stanley had some very big contradictions. Now, he was talking the talk, but not walking the walk. Or was he? And that's what I want to discuss with you today, Dr. Now. As we always say, link the description to the actual article about this, and there's a whole bunch of links within the article on videos and everything like that about this story. But recently, Andy Stanley was it his own conference, or was he speaking at a conference?
No, the conference was on the church premises, I think.
Yeah.
It was associated with the church, but it wasn't for the church. So most of the people who attended, as I understand it, weren't out of his own congregation.
Okay, good context. So he was speaking at this conference. He there were two.
Oh, I don't even know whether he spoke at the conference.
Yeah, he did.
I don't think he did. Okay.
Yeah, because he he introduced it. He opened it. So because this part of the article was talking about his opening comments or something like that, where how he introduced these people. That's how I read it anyway. I'm dyslexic, so don't take for whatever I read from a grain of salt.
Well, the big controversy actually came from what he preached in his church the following Sunday.
Yes.
But
okay.
The article that we're referring to gets onto that. Yeah.
So in this article, it talks about that he was at a conference with, or this conference was at their church, or and there was two speakers there that are in a same-sex same-sex relationship, and Andy Stanley was then preaching the following week about same-sex marriage and not being sticking to the New Testament foundations of what a sexual relationship is and all those sorts of things. So he's preaching about it. His church believes against. How do I say this properly? His church, he believes, and his church teaches, men and woman relationships, right? However, at this conference at his church, there were people put on a platform, and the challenge with putting people on a platform is you're condoning their lifestyle and their decisions, everything like that. He preaches one thing, and yet he's at a conference that is displaying another. First question I've got is that not walking the walk but talking the talk? Like what? Like, is that a definition of that?
Maybe. Look, his sermon, which anybody can view that online, it's been up online for a few weeks now, was his response to the criticism that was made of that unconditional conference. And broadly speaking, the criticism was that all of the speakers were either living a lifestyle which is contrary to classical Christianity, that is biblically based Christianity, or if you like, traditional Christianity. So all of the speakers were speaking contrary to that particular perspective. And many of them, if not all of them, or probably not all of them, but many of them were actually living a lifestyle inconsistent with the lifestyle to which we're called as biblical Christians. So that was the criticism. And so his sermon was probably half of his sermon was spent on explaining why it was that the conference was held at all, the purpose being to help parents in particular, but other family members, figure out how they would respond if one of their own family members, particularly a child, basically outs themselves in a family situation and says, I'm gay or I'm transgender or whatever. And actually, I think he made a fairly strong case there. And then he reiterated that his own church's view of marriage aligns with the traditional understanding of biblical expression of human sexuality. But then he went on to say that a celibate lifestyle for some is unsustainable. And I think that's where he undid everything that he said previous to that. And so I think the big issue he has is that most of us are no longer certain really where he stands. Yeah. That's the problem.
But I suppose this is what I want to jump on with this, because we as Christians have been called to be welcoming and loving of everyone and not judge people and things like that. And I suppose as leaders, we do have to. I know what I'm saying is incorrect, but appease the crowd. We do need to present to the people we're leading are welcoming and a little bit of a warm, like a little accepting. But how do we be accepting of people, even if we're against what they're doing? Because that's what I think that he was doing in his sermon, was he was kind of going, this is what I stand for, this is what I believe, but we love everyone and we understand different situations, and there's, you know, it's not all black and white and everything. So because I feel like, well, especially in ministry, we paint too much of a black and white picture. It's black or white and that's it, without taking into consideration actual everyday life and the challenges people have with battling with things and everything like that. So how do we stand strong for something while still having understanding for people, I suppose, is the right way to say it.
Well, look, on many issues, I think the Bible is black and white.
Yeah.
And one of the areas in which it's black and white is expression of human sexuality. As a biblical Christian, that's what I believe. And I know others have a different view, but generally speaking, well, certainly classical Christianity or biblical Christianity has always held to that perspective, that the only appropriate expression of human sexuality takes place within the confines of a marriage between one man and one woman. That is, one biological man and one biological woman.
What I'm saying is, I'm not arguing the black and white of the word, right? I'm not arguing that it's not clear. I'm not saying that. But what I'm saying is, we as ministry leaders do tend to just go, that's sin, that's wrong, and that's it, rather than actually taking into consideration the actual battle people have. Like, rather than just going, that's sin, don't do it, how do we actually, instead of, just disregarding them, how do we make them feel welcome and understood without accepting that,
Yeah, look, it's a bit difficult. It's a lot difficult. But, if somebody murders someone, we don't say that's sin, don't do it again, do we?
Mm.
So let's, for a start, let's start treating all sin the same way, and the way that Jesus did, because he said, go and sin no more. Yeah. So he didn't overlook sin. Now, I think where I really disagree with Andy Stanley is he uses the word unsustainable. Mm. And I think that is to actually deny the power of the Holy Spirit to change us.
Yeah.
Now, do we fall into sin? Yes, we do. And look, even somebody who is a Christian who is same-sex attracted might actually engage in sexual activity, which a classical understanding of the Bible would say that is sin. Look, I don't think that disqualifies somebody from heaven. Anybody who post-salvation has gossiped has committed sin, right?
Yeah, yeah.
If you've been angry at your brother, according to Jesus, you've committed sin. If you've had sexual thoughts about someone who's not your wife as a man, Jesus said that's sin, right? He said that's equivalent to adultery. Mm-hmm. So I'm not singling anybody out here. And I don't think, we've got to allow that all of us as imperfect human beings are not sinless.
Yeah.
And some of us find it more easy to resist some sin than others. On the issue of being welcoming, that's different to being accepting. Mm. What we don't accept is behaviour that is not consistent with the Word of God. A church service is a public meeting. Mm. There may be some church services that are not billed as public meetings, but probably 97% of church services, they're public, right? And that means anybody can come. Mm. Now, my view is, you're welcome to come. Jesus offers the invitation to come, follow me. Now, that's not qualified by you've got to get your life right before you become a follower of Jesus Christ. And I think that's one of the important points that Andy Stanley made, and I agree with him.
Yeah.
But I think where he's not been clear is whether it's our job, once somebody is attending, to actually teach them the biblical perspective.
Yeah.
And look, I think we probably focus too much on things like sexual sin, for example, and that's probably because it's not long since the church lost the battle over things like same-sex marriage, so it's pretty raw, and the activists are really rubbing our noses in it, and so on. But the issue is one of sin in general, and I think we need to be thoroughly biblical from the pulpit, and we need to make it abundantly clear that being a Christian is signing up not just to receiving something, but it's signing up to outworking what we've received in every area of our lives. And that includes us allowing the Holy Spirit to work on all of those areas in our lives where there is sin. See, holiness it's a process. So the Greek word that is translated sanctification and holiness, it's the same Greek word. And it seems to me that sanctification is something that happens instantaneously when we're saved. So it simply means we're set apart for God's purposes. And I think that was one of the deep insights that Calvin had in the early days of the Reformation. But holiness is something which is a process, and it occurs over a long period of time. I don't think using a word like unsustainable in the context of us being holy is a good word at all. Because I think what we need to be doing is offering people hope that they can live a life of holiness. And in fact, the Christian life is about holiness. I think we've bought into the lie somewhat that it's about happiness. That's what the world seeks, but as Christians, it's not happiness, but it's holiness.
Yeah.
It's holiness that we seek, and it's holiness that the Lord is after. And holiness means that we eschew sin in our lives, all sin, not just sexual sin, but all sin. And to use a word like unsustainable, I think misleads us.
Well, it gives permission. That's what I think.
It
As
does.
Soon as you say that, I hear it and go, oh, well, if it's unsustainable, I may as well just do it anyway.
Well, yes, I guess that's true. But see, then you've got to say, well, okay, does that apply to all areas of sin? And we would say, no, it doesn't apply to murder. It doesn't apply to sexual abuse. It doesn't apply to stealing. So why would we be inconsistent?
Yeah.
And look, Andy Stanley has made a couple of major faux pas. Well, this will be his third that I'm aware of. One was his tirade against small churches, and I watched that sermon a few times, and he had to backtrack that one. He had to walk that one back. Then his other one more recently, of course, was the place of the Old Testament. He had to walk that one back as well. Now, I mean, I think, you see, he's got a very, very high profile, and there'll be thousands of people assessing every sermon that he delivers, and you know, it's out there on social media for anybody to listen to. And I think in those three instances, he's made a mistake.
Yeah.
And he's tried to walk it back, but he hasn't done a really good job of walking it back either.
Do you think that that's part of the pressure of being a mega church pastor is you do have to always be thinking about how am I going to push the envelope? How am I going to, share something in a new way, in a different way that people haven't heard and stuff like that? Or like, do you think that that's part of that challenge? Or do you think it's just even a smaller church pastor does the same thing, but they just don't have the same exposure, so they're just not being caught for it?
Oh, look, that's partly true. I mean, I've looked at a fair few sermons online of people in small churches, and I sometimes think people are off their rockers, quite frankly, because we really need to assess what anybody is preaching against the Word of God. I think in any case, and not everybody gets it right all the time. But I think if you've got a very high profile, you've got to expect that you're going to be scrutinised, and therefore you need to take extra special care with what you say. Look, I think it can be pretty difficult for pastors of mega churches because they're very very large enterprises, and they have some of the characteristics of a business. I don't think a church is a business, but mega churches are business-like in many respects, especially in terms of running programs, having large numbers of employees rather than volunteers, having very high profiles, that they are influencers, there's no doubt about that. Look, if you've got 30,000 people in your church and your church services are going online, you are going to have a significant influence over probably many hundreds of thousands of people. And you need to be very, very intentional in what you're saying. And I think you need to think ahead of time what signals you're going to give to the hundreds of thousands of people whom you influence.
Yeah. So, look, one thing you've said is he's made a couple of mistakes and he's backtracked it and he's tried to walk back. I think there's some credit in that. The fact that he's going, whoops, so, let me try to explain things. He kind of recognizing that he may have made a mistake or something like that, but maybe hasn't, how do I say this? Maybe hasn't corrected it in the right way. Still trying to.
He's got to do more on the unconditional conference. There's no doubt about that. I think he responded quite well to the small church criticism and to the Old Testament criticism that he made. But look, who am I to tell him what to do, really? Yeah. But I just think he needs to be very, very careful about the fact that he's not just shepherding. I think it's about 30,000 people at North Point, and they've got other campuses as well. There are hundreds of thousands of people who are listening to his sermons. You've got to just be so careful what you're doing. And I think to hold that conference, now they said this is not a conference about theology, but it cannot not be about the Bible, because it's held in a church and it was held for church people.
Yeah.
So it's a little bit disingenuous to say, oh no, this is not about theology. Theology proper is really about knowing God or learning about God. We use the term a lot more loosely, really, to talk about Bible studies, understanding of the Word of God. And there was definitely a lot of that going on at the conference.
Yeah.
The whole thing is problematic, I think. And I think he's got a lot of work to do to convince people generally, and I'm talking not just about sort of casual watchers of his sermons and that sort of thing. I'm talking about serious, well-read, well-educated, long-standing Christian leaders who have got considerable worries about what he's done, and the fact that, if anything, the sermon he gave, which was supposed to address the criticisms, if anything, he's made his position appear more ambivalent.
Yeah. And I just wonder whether that's just him not finding the right words. Maybe he didn't find. Maybe he didn't say what he. Maybe he didn't get across the message that he wanted to get, or muddled some words or whatever. And it just lesson on how important it is to choose your words carefully as a leader.
I guess, well, using Jesus' example, of course, was go and sin no more. And he didn't shout it at people.
Yeah.
He's really saying, change your lifestyle, make it different from now on. And with the help of the Holy Spirit, we do. What we can't do is love people to hell.
Yeah.
We can't do that. See, love has become such a soppy, sentimental kind of idea, but it's not. We can't sort of love people to hell. So I think we must receive everyone who comes through the door, but I think that's different to accepting the way in which they live, the way in which they work out their Christian faith. And I mean, I think it would have been good to have, half of the speakers at that conference, people who have struggled with, in this case, the focus, of course, was on expression of human sexuality, have really struggled with it, and who have maintained celibacy.
Yeah.
That I think would have been helpful.
Yeah.
It's a difficult thing. And again, look, let's look at leaders of mega churches too with a great deal of compassion. I don't think it's easy, and we've spoken about others who have been through significant struggles when things fell apart, and it certainly does. And things fall apart in smaller churches. I am aware of things falling apart in smaller churches, but they just don't hit the headlines. They don't, they don't rate an article in Christianity Today or Premier Christianity or somewhere like that. But look, I think we do probably need to be very careful as pastors that we see ourselves as stewards, and we should always be doing the very best we can to find where God is working and to work alongside him.
Yeah. Well, let's transition then, because we're talking about Andy Stanley, walking the walk, but talking the talk, but not walking the walk, or not talking the talk well enough, or maybe misspeaking in the way, but just not walking the walk. What does the Bible have to say about walking the walk? Let's go to our leadership lessons from Luke. Yes, a series we're going through a whole bunch of things, not in order. We're just finding some passages in Luke that are aligned with our message. And today we're talking about really like the contradictions of leadership, and how do we overcome that as a leader? How do we make sure that we are walking the walk and not just talking the talk? Well, I'm going to lead us to Luke 6, verse 46 to 49, where the title is The Wise and Foolish Builders. Jesus was speaking to the crowd, and he asked them, "Why do you call me Lord, Lord, and do not do what you say? I will show you what he is like who comes to me and hears my words and puts them into practice. He is like a man building a house who dug deep down and laid the foundation on rock. When a flood came, the torrent struck that house, but could not shake it, because it was well built. But the one who hears my words and does not put them into practice is like a man who built a house on the ground, built a house on the ground without a foundation," or some refer to built it on the sand. The moment the torrent struck the house, it collapsed, and its destruction was complete. I kind of look at these stories we've been talking about today about not contradicting yourself as a leader and making sure you stick to what you believe and do what you believe, and I think that what this story talks about is our values and how we are, what we stand for. And we spoke about a little bit earlier about how when we build, when we make a decision and choose to believe someone or have an opinion on something, we take our time with it. We take our time to research everything like that. And I kind of believe that that's what this is talking about building your foundation first. Make sure you build your foundation on what you believe. And obviously, the metaphor of this passage was Jesus is the rock and he is your foundation. So you should be building everything on him first. So I'm not negating that, Sunday school answer, yes, Jesus, right? But then taking it further as leaders, if we're building our foundations, our beliefs, our opinions, our operations, the way we do things, the way we make decisions, if we're building that on solid foundation, research, and obviously biblically based as well, then obviously when we get those attacks from people, when people come accusing, we're going to stand firm. But if we just build our opinions on sand, on not built on solid foundation, just on whatever comes and goes, in that time, that's when we're going to be washed away by whatever storm comes our way, whatever obstacles or any attacks that come at us. And so my encouragement to you is make sure that when you're forming your opinions, make sure that when you're deciding how to operate, make sure it's built on a solid foundation, built on biblical foundation, on Jesus, but also built on good research, good wisdom, getting advice of others and all those sorts of things to make sure that when you're operating, then you can walk the walk and talk the talk, because what you're doing is so built on such a strong foundation. And also when it is built on that foundation, when you've spent the time to research and build and push down and make sure it's on solid foundation, that's when you're leading from a place of stability as well, rather than just leading from an opinion. And then you will probably just be talking about things rather than actually doing it, because the more time you spend researching, the more time you spend getting to know something and make a decision on something, it becomes who you are. And that's why, even just tonight, I was with some friends and I was talking to them about some of this, about some leadership principles, and they were like, because I was talking about my leadership coaching principle, and then I used an example of my personal life where I've used, they're like, what, you use your leadership coaching in your personal life? It's like, yeah, because it's a foundation that I've built for myself, that I know it's a solid foundation. That's why I've spent all this time developing our resources. Yeah, shameless plug, free leadership development program down in the link below. But it is a solid foundation because it's who I am, because I've spent all this time researching, did a master's, I've spent years researching, I'm reading books and attending conferences. I've built up this foundation that it is part of who I am. So I literally walk this stuff out in my everyday life. Doesn't mean I don't make mistakes. I still make mistakes, but it's a part of who I am, and that's why it's a solid foundation. Dr. Rod, what more do you have to share from this verse on our topic?
Nothing.
Sorry, I did go on a little bit of a rant there, didn't I?
No, I think you presented it really well. Jesus is saying, well, if he who hears my word and does it is like the person who built a house on that firm foundation being rock. Of course, Jesus is the rock. And I agree with you 100% that ultimately what we believe must be based on the Word of God. The Word of God is the final arbiter on all matters concerning Christian faith and the practice thereof. So it's pretty important, and you need to have a very strong foundation. So if you don't have a strong foundation, you just cannot stand when the opposition comes. And that's why, of course, he contrasts the house built on rock with the house built on sand, which doesn't stand up to the storm. It gets washed away. But I think importantly, right at the end of that passage, at least in my Bible, which is the New King James Version, I think you tend to use NIV.
Yes, I
But
do.
it says, and the ruin of that house was great. So there's actually judgment there on the person who builds their house on sand. And I think as leaders, we need to be aware of that, that we're actually accountable. We are accountable. We're accountable to a higher authority than any on earth. And that should put good fear in our hearts, that fear which causes us to look to God and to look to his word as the very foundation of everything that we do. And one of the great privileges I have is talking to people in business about those foundations, about the rock upon which everything about their business is to be built.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. And so, look, we've been speaking today about contradictions as leaders. Leaders, we do contradict ourselves at times. And is it okay? Well, as we've discussed, sometimes we can change our mind and we can change it, but make sure when you change it, it is built on solid foundation. So I hope that you've learnt something about leadership and from a Christian perspective. If it's been helpful for you, hey, I've seen some comments come through. Thank you for commenting. It's great to have you on. Consider, give us a like. Helps the algorithm. And also, if you want to see more content like this, Dr. Rod and I do a podcast every week. It's all, all these segments are all cut up for you for easy watching, or you can go back and watch other ones and put them on while you're getting ready in the morning or going to work or whatever. So consider subscribing to our channel. We would be greatly appreciative of you joining us on this mission of ours to eradicate poor leadership through teaching leadership principles from a biblical perspective. But thank you for taking the time to watch us. And Dr. Rod, thank you so much for sharing your wisdom with us once again this week.
Well, thank you for the very great privilege of joining you.
Everyone, bless you. Have a spectacular week and continue to learn, live, and lead on purpose. See you next week.